Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m. The Wednesday is a special edition of Tell Me Your Story. We hope that you will listen because we stream live at those times at richarddugan.com. And what else have we got for you? Oh, yeah, podcasts. We're all over the place. I am grateful for those who have been listening to these programs, these podcasts, because we are over 104,000 listens since 2018. I've said it before. I don't know what those numbers really mean. I could go through and look at the analytics and all of that stuff, but I'm just glad folks are listening. And we're also on YouTube, where you can also listen to and watch these interviews, get to know our guest a little bit more, having a visual there, as well as yours truly. And we would also ask that if you could support the work we're doing here, we would greatly appreciate that. We have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And we also ask, and we're going to get into this with our guest, we also ask you to participate in what we call the Decade of Perfect Vision, where we encourage you to go within and listen to that still small voice. I've been doing that for quite a number of years. I've gotten better at it. I trust more every time I do that. There's still days when things are really adverse. That's the word we're going to use today. That it's like, nah, I just want out. I'm done. I can't. I want to go home, wherever that might be. I can't go back to Phoenix. I have promised myself I would never move back there. Too hot. Too hot. My guest today, she is a peak performance coach, hypnosis consultant for health, athletics, business, performing arts, and academics. And she has a website as well. We'll give you that in just a moment. She has a book out that we're going to talk about. This is where that one word adversity comes in. And no, this program is not a sports program, in spite of the fact that we're going to be wrestling through adversity, empowering children, teens, and young adults to win in life. And my very special guest today is Christine Silverstein. I want to thank you so much for being with us here on the program. I've really been looking forward to this because obviously, even the adults, we're having trouble dealing with the adversities of life. I mean, I could give you my laundry list of all of the things that have happened just in the past 2 years. And then just in the last few months. And some of them I've been through before in my life. And I'm still here. I'm still alive, still kicking, breathing, and so forth. Talk to me about why you focus primarily on the groups of people that you are in terms of children, teens, and young adults.
Well, I work with all ages, from the nursery school to the nursing home, but I love working with children, teens, and young adults because they are our future, and also because I have 4 children that I raised, and I saw how they needed support when they were growing up. And I have seen on TV, although I don't like to watch the news very often, I do kind of encourage myself to do so, to see what's going on in the world. And I realized that children, teens, and young adults are pushed aside, even to the point of being slaughtered today in Israel. And we need to give them the skill sets for the future, not only to get through today and tomorrow and what they face, but their futures, so that they can release the traumas that are occurring and also be productive and teach the children of the future what to do to have a better world. And I know because I've worked for 27 years at my center, the Summit Center for Ideal Performance, working with these age groups, that there is something that you can do to help them to feel good about themselves and win, and to help them to help themselves, which feels really good for them, gaining confidence and securing their future and knowing what to do, especially when there's chaos, but also afterwards, how do you release the traumas from your childhood when you grow up, and how is that going to affect your life in a positive direction rather than a negative direction?
Hmm. I have a problem with the phrase, the children are our future, because it seems as though our society, our institutions, they don't care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
See, here's the question I have for you in this in regards to this conversation regarding this whole wrestling through adversity. Our governments on any level refuse to do anything. I'm not going to sit here and say, okay, we need gun control and we need this and that and the other. No, I'm not even going there. They refuse to do anything to protect our children. I tell you what, I'm so glad I went through school in the 60s and 70s,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt, with the exception of the bullies I've talked about before, I felt safe in school. I could turn to teachers if I had a problem. I was legally blind until I was 36. And when I was in school, I had a resource teacher. That's what they called them back then.
Mm-hmm.
I still remember her, Mrs. Reardon, Mary Reardon. I'm sure she's since passed away. And she was there. I mean, she helped me through the basic classwork. I think it was like an hour, 2 or 3 times a week that we would meet, sometimes in the library, sometimes it's just a vacant room. And she would help me to go through math and English and so forth. But we would talk about other things as well, in terms of, what's going on at school in my life. I'm sad for the children who are in school today, because I have to believe they flat out do not feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us a little bit about this aspect, if you will, how important it is, not just for children, but since that's what we're talking about right now, to feel safe, not only in school, but at home, at the mall, on the street. I mean, I don't recall ever having to worry about pedophiles abducting me. We had the run of the neighborhood. Oh my gosh, we had a great time. So talk to us a little bit about this aspect of feeling safe, both for the children as well as, of course, the teens and young adults, but even for that matter, even the adults, such as myself. I'm 63 and I don't get too wrapped up in, like you. I try not to. It's an irony. I work for a news talk station. I try not to listen to the news because it just is not. It's not helpful. But talk to us about the feeling of safety, and is it possible to bring it back, or is that Pandora's box been opened, and we can't go back?
Well, I am hopeful. I am an optimist that we can change. And it does come from adults, as you mentioned, the government, the people who care, communities. And so we have to look, step back a moment and look at, so what can we do? And even in a small community, you can be helpful to children and set things up in a positive way. So my perspective is we need to teach the children what to do to help themselves. So when they grow up, they won't be terrorists. We need to teach them to be engineers and teachers and nurses rather than how do you create a bomb in your garage.
Mm.
So that's part of it. And we're talking about that even now. I heard commenters say that in Palestine, in Gaza, the Hamas is teaching the children, the young children, to all the trauma to be terrorists when they grow up. So, in a sense, we teach them these things when they're young and through the trauma of it all. And that's what they turn to. That's all they know. And there's this rage inside them.
Mhm.
So we need to start with adults and looking at ourselves and everyday people, on a family level, on a community level, to realize that you and I, as children, we had traumas. You're talking about bullying. I had some challenges in school. I had high energy. I was an A student, but I happened to be very energetic in the classroom one time. I was sitting in the classroom. I was in the 12th grade. I was 12 years old. And I used to play kind of in my mind, imagination, basketball in my mind. I was in the first row, first seat, and there was a trash can in front of me near the door. And I went to a Catholic school, and the nun came in and said, "Oh, today your teacher's absent, so I have to take care of this class, my class, and the other eighth grade." And so she was feeling overwhelmed now looking back, because there were 50 students in each class. So that means 100 students she had in charge of. And anyway, she was talking about that. And I had a ball of paper in my hand, rolled up, and I used to play basketball, right? So I threw the ball of paper into the trash can, and I missed. It bounced off the rim, and it hit the bottom of the teacher's habit, the nun's habit, and she went into a furious state, because I was the perpetrator of a crime, throwing something at the teacher. And so we had assembly that day, downstairs in the auditorium. And with that, because I was a lightweight, I was the youngest person in my class, and I didn't weigh very much. So she just pushed me down these very big cement steps, without a railing. And then again, she caught up to me and pushed me down the rest of the way. And so that was a result of having high energy. And I look back, and I never had the chance to say, I didn't mean, to throw the habit. And she didn't ever apologize to me. But when we went to the assembly that day, and I was highly embarrassed because the principal announced what I had done to the whole school and how I was, a bad girl in essence. So the thing with that was the year prior, I did have this same teacher. Her name, from Latin, translated from Latin, was Queen of Peace. And I had her in the seventh grade, and I was an A student, and it never, caused any challenges. So I look back, and even at that age, I realized that she had pressure. That she was taking care of 100 children, but at the same time, I felt really bad about it because I never had a chance to talk to her, anybody about it, and I never told my mother about it. When I went home, because in those days, so you would be asked, "So what did you do? To deserve it?" But I think now looking back, I should have, because it was dangerous. I could have been harmed. I could have had broken bones, because these were the old school cement steps, with no hand railing. So I really should have reported it to my mother, but I was afraid to do so. So that's an idea. So I could bring that forward, and I could have that a trauma in my life. But of course, I worked through that. And I choose now to look at the positive things I learned at Catholic school and, bring that forward in my life. And there were some sisters who helped me even later in life, with life review, before my mother died. So it's not as if I'm rejecting that, but I'm just saying, you get this diagnosis at that time. It was just the beginning of the research on ADHD. And so, your child has ants in her pants, and that's all they could say about me, even though I was an A student.
Well,
So we have to learn these things. And in my book, chapter 8, I do have that. I do have the title, ADHD, Where Did the Ants in My Pants Go? And that's the review of the story, but also what's going on with the drugs and the labels that we have with children who have high energy.
well, I remember being taught in biology class in both grade school and high school that boys and girls are different. That
Mhm.
girls' brains mature a little more quickly than boys.
Mhm.
That boys are full of, I'll go ahead and use the phrase, piss and vinegar.
Mhm.
uh, and I have a feeling that if I had been born 10 years later, I probably would have been put on a Ritalin or some other,
Mhm.
I'm going to call it a mood altering drug.
Mhm.
And it's like, wait a minute. What the heck is this all about? These
Mhm.
people don't have a problem. And now this is just my observation, mind you, and I'd love to have your perspective on this. These kids don't have a problem. They're kids. They're
Mhm.
children. They're supposed to be high energy so that they
Yes.
can
Mhm.
go out and play and do all these things. Let me hear from you about your thoughts on this.
Yes, exactly. Well, we know in our society currently, boys are more prone to being put on drugs like Ritalin and Adderall. And it's like by the time they're 7 years old, and it gets worse as they enter high school. And but girls are looked at in a different way. For me and my family, I have three older sisters and a younger brother, and we all had high energy. So we just thought that was normal, in childhood, and we could get a lot of things done. And I was able to climb a telephone pole when I was 3 years old, and I was able to win a skating competition when I was 10. I trained myself. So I put my energy into that and knew what to do. But many people think that that's abnormal, that high energy should be just squelched, and that could be done by taking drugs without the benefit of behavioral conditioning, which is very important. So it's not to say that the use of drugs in all cases is is not beneficial. It can be initially, but then you need to learn the mindful toughness skill sets that I teach so that you can be productive in your life and use that energy. After all, we have an energy crisis, and gasoline is high priced. So are we just going to throw the gasoline in the tank out onto the street, or are we going to use it productively to drive? And that's how I feel about it. So over the course of time, I learned how to channel my energy, get through high school, although I had challenges there as well, because I would ask questions that the nun didn't like how come God, if he's so omnipotent and omniscient, how come he can't make a boulder so big that he can't move it? I asked that question when I was 13 in religion class, and the nun told me that if the Pope had heard my question, he would excommunicate me, and so
Wow.
I thought, okay, I'm never going to ask a question again. And once again, I didn't tell my mom, who was putting me through the school, paying for it with her waitress money. So I never told her, because who knows, what God would do if he ever found out. So I never talked to her about it. But looking back, it did squelch my ability to speak out and to ask questions that really in the past philosophers asked. St. Augustine asked questions like that, and really the nun, she didn't know how to answer it, and so that's the way she responded. But I remember feeling embarrassed, thinking, well, oh my gosh, I'm going to get excommunicated because I asked a question that was a horror to me at 13.
I can relate because I've been asking those hard questions. I didn't stop asking because the answers that I was getting from the clergy, both being born and raised Roman Catholic, but also working for, I guess you'd call it an evangelical Christian radio station, the answers did not make any sense to me. Just
Mm-hmm.
absolutely didn't make sense. And someone said to me, well, Richard, you need to read the writings of the founding fathers of the faith. And I thought, okay, wait a minute, hold on, slow down. You want me to read the writings of these guys who have been put up on a pedestal and they've been asking these same questions.
Mhm.
So would that not stand to reason that I'm in the same class as them because I'm asking the same questions and I never even heard of some of these people?
Mhm.
And it's just one of those things. And I even ask the same kinds of questions when it comes to day-to-day living and some of the things that are happening. For example, you talked about in the not watching the news, and especially the talking heads when they start to expound, and this is on both sides. This is not exclusively one
Mhm.
side or the other. And they start name calling. And my first question
Mhm.
to these name callers is, how is that helping to solve the problem?
Exactly. Hmm.
It just
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense. Let me ask you. And before we go any further, folks, we're talking with Christine Silverstein, and we're talking about her book, the latest work that she has. We hope that you'll get a copy by going to idealperformance.net and get a copy of Wrestling Through Adversity, Empowering Children, Teens, and Young Adults to Win in Life.
Yes, and that is available on Amazon, so it's easy to access.
Yeah. Is it available as an Audible yet?
It's in the works now.
Ah,
It's being recorded. And I have a narrator who's doing that for me for audio books.
excellent, excellent. Well,
Hmm.
very good. I actually enjoy listening to um, the books being read. And as a kid growing up, I was legally blind, so I was getting books from Recordings for the Blind and
Hmm.
Talking Books for the Blind. And some of these readers were just amazing. This was back in the late 60s, early 70s, long before
Yes.
Audible was a big deal.
Yes, and I'm glad that it is now for people like you, as you were saying, but also a lot of people like to just listen to books. They don't have
Yes,
time in their lives to read these days. So they listen like my husband does when he's doing chore, around the house or in the garden. And that's how he gets his reading in. So it's for both groups of people and just make it accessible to everyone, which
absolutely.
I'm very happy to do.
I even had a conversation with the general manager of said Christian radio station many years ago, back in the 80s, early 90s, when there was a big brouhaha over the fact that the Library of Congress was paying for Playboy to be printed in Braille. And the conservative Christians did not want that because they said, no, no, that's terrible stuff. First of all, they don't they don't print the pictures for starters. But the more important part is what you are saying to the blind and visually impaired community is, I will tell you what's appropriate to read. That's what's happening again here in the 21st century,
Oh,
for,
yes.
for
Hmm.
example, in Florida.
Hmm.
And it's like, does nobody seem to understand we're talking about Fahrenheit 451? That kind
Hmm.
of thing. Speaking of
Hmm.
which, just a sidebar, do you know what was the first book that Kindle dropped from its reading list? It's probably back now, but early on, Fahrenheit 451 was
Hmm.
dropped from their reading list. A little bit of irony there. But
It is, there is irony for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Hmm.
So we are looking for answers. You have some in your book, Wrestling Through Adversity, Empowering Children, Teens, and Young Adults to Win in Life. And your chapters are set up in a very interesting way, in that you try to lay out sort of like a metaphor,
Yes.
almost like Aesop's fables of a sort, so that people can sort of grasp that a little bit better rather than, um, going through a lot of, oh, I don't know, a lot of trying to figure out, oh, what is she saying? Because a lot of times the metaphor is a wonderful thing because it speaks to pretty much anybody. I want to ask
Mhm.
you about your first chapter, Building Resilience in the Face of Adversity. Um, I've always been a very optimistic person, even as a child. When adversities come along, and I don't see adversity as a negative at all. I've always thought, okay, well, this is what's happening right now, this quote unquote adversity, but I don't know how it's going to, how it's going to wind up, how it's going to come to fruition, if you will. And as long as I keep a positive attitude towards what's happening, I'll be okay. No matter what happens. I mean, I worked for a station that was being sold. I lost my job on the 28th of February, 2006. My wife quit her job on the 1st of March, 2006. But it opened up a doorway for us to consider moving to where we are today, Santa Barbara. I always wanted to be by the ocean. I don't get out there as often as I'd like, but needless to say, so I'm close. Because we don't know the final outcome, is there a way for us to process this information that's happening, like, for example, my job being eliminated and my wife quitting hers, that we can better, I don't know if it's understand what's happening per se, as much as maybe this is where we want to go within and say, hey, what do I do next? Guide me. I need help here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think there is a process, and we use it, but we don't realize that we're using it. For instance, I mentioned before when I was 10 years old, I joined this, I signed up for a skating race in New York City. I grew up in a small town called Far Rockaway, which is the Rockaway Peninsula in New York City, and it's near the ocean. And so I was in this playground, PS 104 in Bayswater, and there was the little station, the brick station, with a man who gave out the knock hockey sticks and the basketballs for the playground there. And I saw a sign, and it said that there was going to be this skating race, citywide skating race. So right away, I signed up for it. And I never told my parents about it. My father was the director of the Police Athletic League in my town, and he had told me that there were no sports for girls, especially in his program. He had basketball, football, and baseball. And so I signed up, and I went over to the handball court where they measured your height, and I came out to be in the mite class, MITE, because I was petite, but it was according also to your age. And I decided, well, what's a mite? You know, a mite is this little bug that burrows under your skin and causes scabies, right? So I made myself into Mighty Mouse. I figured I'd be Mighty Mouse. And I practiced, put my skates on every day, tied them to my saddle shoes that had I had from school. I had to wear at school, and they were the only shoes that would fit my metal skates. And I just practiced and saw myself going over the finish line first, having little wings on my heels like Pegasus to help me with my speed, and setting my performance goals, my plans of action, all the things I use now with my clients, and actually winning the local Far Rockaway race, and then going to Queens after that and coming home with new skates, brand new skates. I never had a pair of brand new skates before because I'm the fourth daughter. And so they were always handed down to me. So I put the new skates on the kitchen table when I got home. And my mother said, "Where did you get those skates?" And I said, "I won them in a skating race." And she said, "What?" And my father, of course, was beaming when he came home. And so they were so beautiful. They had red inserts, and they were from the Globe Skate Company. And then I put them on to win the Queen's Championship. And that was I got this little jacket with Pegasus wings on it, actually on the chest on the left side. And I was eligible to go to the New York City Championship in Central Park, and I placed there as well. So, so it was this idea that I got this bracelet with coins on it, international coins I had never seen beyond U.S. currency, and I thought, oh, I'm like a world champion, with this coins on my bracelet, and I felt like I was an international star. So that all came from this idea that I saw myself. I could do this because I learned how to skate when I was 3 years old. And I remember exactly when I learned. We were having this skating race on our street. It was very informal. All the kids got together. We put a chalk line there and we had a whistle. And then we were going to race down the street to the finish line. But I was too little, to do that. But I said to my older sister, so can I skate too? I want to skate too. So she brought me into the basement where the skate box was of the hand-me-down skates. And there was these little skates. They didn't have ball-bearing wheels, and you tied them on your feet. So my sister put them on my feet and brought me to the starting line. And I said to her, so how do I skate? And she showed me, you move your arms and your legs like this. And so the whistle blew and I took off. And my father, on a very rare occasion, had off from work that day, and he saw me go by and he said, look at her go. I just took off, and I think I placed in that little informal race on our street. So that's the idea that you have in your mind. And I think we're all born with ideas, and we can nourish them, and our family, of course, can nourish that within ourselves. And so you have that goal and you see yourself, and that's how you move forward. And when you think about it, that's how you accomplish everything in your life, like how to graduate from high school, how to graduate from college, how to win a championship, a wrestling tournament. And so we have that vision, and that comes first. And we have to nurture that vision and really do what it takes to accomplish that goal. So for me, as a 10-year-old, I would practice every day, rain or shine, all over the town, just wear my skates wherever I went. And also I went to the playground where the race was going to be, and saw myself crossing over that finish line first. So yes, there are things that we can do, but we have to nurture it and learn. One of the techniques that I teach is called mental rehearsal, in which you project that image in the future and you see yourself, feel yourself, hear yourself, and using all your senses to accomplish that goal. And the more you do that, the more you're able to reach that goal, because that's how the brain works, and that's been proven by neuroscientists, the mechanism in which you can mentally rehearse and as if you're actually there performing. So that's really a jewel that we have to nourish, and we all have that capability using the power of our own minds.
We're talking with Christine Silverstein, and we're working through the wrestling through adversity. I would say that we all do it in our own way. I would like to know from your perspective, how important is this winning at life? How important is failure in winning at life?
Mm-hmm. Well, failure, of course, is part of winning. As you said before, you have adversity and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what if I failed this or failed that? Rather than saying, okay, so let's see if this is a learning experience. I call that Edisonian thinking, because of the story of Thomas Edison and how he was working to invent the light bulb and doing everything he could, staying in his lab. When I was younger, I visited his lab. I went to his lab, and I was told by the tour guide how he tried to use everything filament to fix the filament in the light bulb, because it wasn't lasting more than a couple of minutes, and how is that going to light the world? And he had competition as well, a lot of competition to be the first. And so he would say to people, well, where are the mistakes? Everything I try is an opportunity to learn what works and what doesn't work. And so I refer to that as Edisonian thinking. And that's how we all need to think. It's like, what's going to work and what's not going to work. As a matter of fact, I developed a feedback loop to show you how you can use the power of your mind. I work with a lot of wrestlers, high school wrestlers, and so you can mentally rehearse the takedown. What do you do? How do you execute it? How is it working? And then look at your success. Well, maybe you partially took the person down, but not all the way. So what can you do to fine tune it? And then come around and mentally rehearse it again. But in the center of that feedback loop, and I have this in my book as well, is all these questions. What was I feeling when I was performing? What was I thinking in the last few minutes of that match and when I needed to score? And you'll find when you win that you were thinking in a positive direction. I can do this. I'll use my high crotch takedown. Or you were thinking, no, he's too strong. I can't escape from bottom. And you were feeling a lack of confidence in yourself, to say the least, if you're thinking in a negative direction. So you can change that, and you can feel confident and look confident, even if you don't actually feel it within your body. You have to present yourself as a confident person. Presentation is everything. So the feedback loop can help you, and that's what Thomas Edison actually used to invent the light bulb. And even with that, people thought, well, maybe he didn't do it. He wasn't the inventor, but it was proven years later that he was the first one.
Hmm. Well, yeah, that's also what's rather interesting as we look back in history at some of the inventions that are attributed to some of the big names, whether it be Marconi or Edison and so forth, when in the reality, the only reason why their name appears as the inventor of is because they got to the patent office first.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
by the same token, there's a phrase, I think it's from the Old Testament, that says that there is nothing new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, all right, you want to invent this or so forth. I mean, we then, not long ago, we had, I believe it was a Japanese gentleman who developed the LED. And I think
Mm-hmm.
he may have won, I'm not sure if he won the Nobel Peace Prize, some award, international award. And I'm thinking, well, okay, that's great. All he did was he shifted from one form of generating a light to another form. But I mean, we could still be using torches today for all that mattered, because, or candles, it's like, it's not really a new invention. It's just an innovation on what's already here.
Exactly, a variation on the theme and how somebody looks at it in a different way. For instance, the creation of penicillin and how that was looked at as by the scientist as look how this mole is killing this things in my petri dish. It's look what's happening now. I have to start it all over again. you know and so then the inventor comes along and says, well, wait a minute, maybe we could use this for purposes of health.
Yeah, it is truly amazing what we are experiencing today.
Especially after the wars, during wars and after,
Mm-hmm.
with penicillin was a big boon, especially after World War II.
Mm. Well, we're talking with Christine Silverstein. The book is entitled Wrestling Through Adversity, and you're listening to Tell Me Your Story. How did you come up with that title? What connection? I mean, you've already mentioned, that you supposedly were a wrestler as a young one. Why is that part of the title of this book? What's the connection?
Well, from the very beginning, as I said, I was watching these things on TV. I was very much influenced by the events in early 2022, and that was the start of the Ukraine war. And also, Uvalde came early in that year, the shooting of the children. And there were other episodes of, for instance, elite college athletes committing suicide.
Mm.
And I was outraged by all of these things. And I just so happened to look at a book that I had on my shelf. It was called Wrestling Through Life, and I used that in my introduction in my book. And it was a story. It was a biography, actually, of a wrestler who had been a wrestler, and then he was a wrestling coach later on in life. His name was Phil Nowick, and during the 9/11 attack, he worked at Merrill Lynch on the upper floors. And so he wrote in his book during his time when he was actually dying from having cancer spread throughout his body, and he was, I think, in his late 30s at the time, because he was racked with it. But he talked about his experience in the World Trade Center that day and how he went to work early to exercise because they had an exercise floor and facility there. And he had just finished his exercise sitting there in his shorts and his sneakers. And all of a sudden, the attack started. And what he had to do to get out of the building and to run down the street, and there was so much smoke coming into his lungs, he couldn't breathe, and glass and all kinds of things he was inhaling. But because he was an athlete, he was in good shape and he had his sneakers on, he could run away through the thick smoke. And so I was very moved by that story because he talked about in his book before he died how when he was at Merrill Lynch, he didn't fit in. He didn't fit into the everyday life. He didn't go to the right schools. He didn't go to Harvard or the Ivy League schools to become um, a person who could work in the business of Merrill Lynch. And he also, I think he was an attorney, and he didn't go to the right schools for that. And also he had the wrestling physique, a shorter stature with the big muscles, the big shoulders, no chin, as he described it. And he just didn't fit in there. But the one thing that he was really good with analytics. And so he would tell them what he really thought. He'd tell them the truth of what they needed to do. And he inspired me when I picked up that book. I said, oh my goodness, I have to write a book too. And so, especially in light of what was going on. And so he was my inspiration initially. And the metaphor wrestling through adversity doesn't mean just because you're a wrestler. We all grapple with life's challenges. And so I use that as a metaphor to show you, yes, how a wrestler would go through this, but also how everyday people, no matter what our color, no matter what our ethnic background, we all have to work together as a community. And so that was the beginning of my book. And I just thought that it was very appropriate to include everybody, everyday people. It is also written for professionals, not in the sense of the APA style that you use when you do peer review articles, but I do have a lot of references in it and the names of the writers, the journalists, etc. So my colleague read it. I have some endorsements, and they loved it from the perspective of it's for everyone, and you can get benefit from it. And so I used Phil as an example of somebody who wanted to get advance in the corporate world, and he wasn't able to because, as I said, he died young in life. And also everyday people who are sitting there grappling with the challenges of the price of gasoline and food, and the people who have challenges with their children, their teenagers who are in emergency rooms, and that they have suicidal ideation, the no programs for them, and they don't know what to do to help their children. So that was the mindset I had and the metaphor of writing this book from the very beginning.
Sherry Silverstein is my guest, and Wrestling Through Adversity is the conversation we're having, the title of her book. Ideal Performance is the website, idealperformance.net, and we'll be linked to that website so people can find out more about the work that you are doing. What role does your experience in and training in hypnosis, what role does that play? Because I think I saw that in here where that's one of your modalities, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yes, it plays a very big role in my life because I learned it at an early age, a relatively early age, what to do for myself. It started way back when I was in my 20s. and I was married and I wanted to have a family, start a family, but I encountered many miscarriages. And I was told that I was infertile, that I would never have a baby, a live baby, because I had these miscarriages. And and so I went through these challenges. It was so difficult to get through. There were no support groups back then, nobody to talk to after the miscarriages. People would say it's God's will, or you probably it's okay if you don't have children. Lots of people have miscarriages. And I went to many doctors, and they told me you have to take a drug. It was called DES, diethylstilbestrol. And that was the only thing I could do to hold the live baby in my arms after these miscarriages. And I was called an habitual aborter, referred to like that with my diagnosis. So back then I said, so what can I do? I'm not taking this prescription drug. I knew it caused cancer in the offspring and also cancer in the woman, years later. So I rejected that. I threw that prescription in the garbage. And I went home and I decided to make my own self-improvement, self-development program. And I called it fertility consciousness, that I was going to learn. And so I studied meditation, transcendental meditation, which was popular at that time with the Maharishi yogi. And I learned how to do that and get into that mindset. And I also looked up in the telephone book and I found somebody, a psychologist, was doing self-hypnosis, and it was pretty far away from my house. And I had to get there by using the road map because they didn't have GPS then. But I don't know how I got there, but I did. And I learned self-hypnosis, and that came in handy because I had to develop this expectant mind, which was holding a baby in my arms, unlike what the doctor told me, and loving a baby just like other mothers would. And so at night, especially this is now my fourth pregnancy. I had 4 miscarriages in total. This is my fourth pregnancy. And I knew that when I went to bed at night, I was sleeping on a mattress. Underneath the plastic cover was all this hemorrhage from a previous miscarriage that I had had. And so I tried to cover it up with this plastic cover. But I knew when I was trying to go to sleep, I was very anxious because I did have some of the miscarriages at night in the bed. So I would really be upset. And I knew I had to get through the 4th month or the 5th month to maintain this pregnancy. And so that's when I used the self-hypnosis to help me go back to sleep. And it was very powerful. And then I started to use it, of course, for other things. And my son was born some months later. And it was such a big accomplishment for me using the power of my mind. I also looked at diet, what I was eating, supplements, and things like that to support the pregnancy. And I was able to have 4 children after that. 1 more miscarriage between my second and third, but 4 healthy babies without taking that drug, DES.
Hmm. I have to say that as far as number of kids and so forth, I mean, I grew up in a family where we had 6 kids, 2 parents. They wanted a large family, so that's what they did. I don't know if my mother ever had any miscarriages. If she did, I would venture she probably didn't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I wonder if maybe, we need to stop having kids. We got more than enough on this planet. But yet I also recognize that there is, specifically in the female, a strong maternal instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to wonder, because it seems like what you're talking about, where you're going, wrestling through adversity and so forth, that we need to start thinking about what's best for society, what's best for our community.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one gentleman told me in an interview that about 100 to 150 years ago, you had to have kids because you needed them to help to,
Yes.
farm the fields and, carry on the family business, whether it was blacksmithing or a grocery store, et cetera, et cetera. But here we are in the 21st century, and you don't really need that anymore. I mean, we've got machines now, robots, AI, and all of this kind of stuff. And I know that a lot of these subjects are very near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. I mean, I remember sharing this thought with my father. Said, yeah, I chose not to have any kids because I didn't want to pass on the hereditary eye conditions.
Mhm.
And my dad immediately popped up. He says, you do know, Richard, that if I had taken that position, you wouldn't be here. And I said, I know.
Exactly.
I understand that. I do. I
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
But when we are talking about this whole issue of, as we talked earlier in the program about kids,
This conversation, this dialogue has been had on numerous.
that why would you want to bring a kid into this world? You know, I mean, my gosh, look at what we're dealing with. I mean, it's a mess. Well, they were actually saying the same thing back when I came into the world back in 1960. And of course, even back further in the 40s during World War II, and so on and so on and so on. And I guess that's where individuals do need to make up their own minds. I'm not sitting here passing judgment on anybody who chooses to have kids. I mean, my gosh, I have three nieces, a grand niece and a grand nephew. And I and my brother, well, my brother does have one girl. I think he adopted her, or at least he's her stepdad. I don't. I have no children. I have no intention of having children at the age of 63. um, but it kind of goes back to that whole aspect, and I'm wondering how hypnosis helps in this context of wanting to feel comfortable here in this world in the 21st century, in the 2020s, which we call the decade of perfect vision. What about that aspect of, I mean, the population's already popped over the 8 billion several months ago. And so I'm curious as to your perspective on if we're going to continue to have them, you're going to be in business for a long time to come, unfortunately, because we've got a lot of stuff that's going on that we can't control, right? And
Well, we can, but we have to work on it for sure. Well, it's interesting you say that because I remember in college taking an ecology course, and during that time I had to have to I have my own project. So I worked in the Bronx in a clinic, and it was for birth control. They distributed birth control pills and tried to help with family planning. And I remember seeing a lot of people, they were lower socioeconomic level, and they didn't want to have more children, so they came there for birth control. And I also remember my oldest sister standing online getting birth control pills when they first came out after she had two children at a young age. And so at that time, taking that course, I remember going home and telling my mother, Mom, how come you had five children? And also she had two miscarriages, so that meant seven altogether. And she said, why? And I said, well, because we have this population explosion, we have to feed the children. And so I gave her all the reasons like you're talking about. And I told her we shouldn't have any more than 2.5 children, statistically. So my mother looked at me and she said, well, how could you have a half a child anyway? Like that. And so years later now, because I did have eight pregnancies by the time I finished, but four children. my mom came back and said, "Well, what about those 2.5 children you were talking about when you were younger?" We kind of laughed about it, you know. So I gained a different perspective, and it really went back to when I was having this memory of going home from the dentist with my friend and passing by this large brick Presbyterian church that was beautiful to me, and compared to the wood framed Catholic church I went to. And we were imagining ourselves in the future. And Jude, her name was Judy, my friend, and we were talking about getting married in that church as we passed by it, and having a white lace dress, and being married to this handsome, tall, dark, and handsome man. And I remember saying to her, "Well, I think I'm going to have 8 babies when I grow up." And I don't know where that number came up, but it was common in my town at the time for people to have 5 and 6 and even 13, 16 children, even, back then. So 8, I didn't think that was, too big a family. But anyway, I said that, and years later, of course, I had 8 pregnancies. And I think that has something to do with that memory of when I was a child, and also seeing my mother when I was 10 years old. She had a miscarriage after we moved, and she was lifting heavy boxes. And I remember her crying in the kitchen. And that would have been her 6th child, because I was 10 and my younger brother was 8 at the time. So, but she was crying over the fact that she had a miscarriage that morning in the kitchen, in the bathroom. And I remember feeling sad for her, even though she was older by then, in her 40s, but she was crying about it. So it's our lived experience as women, which is different, of course, than men, and also how we were brought up. And I just happen to love children. I love working with children. I really love working with teenagers and young adults. I think they've been left out of the picture altogether, because we have in this country, on in the last day of your when you're 17 years old, you're just a teen, you're just a kid, and then the next day on your birthday, your 18th birthday, all of a sudden you're an adult. And how did you get there? And what skills do you have to until about the age of 25, and that includes young adults. And so what do we do in our society to teach them to be adults and to be prosperous? So my emphasis is on working with young adults, setting them up from college into their work, the work that they're going to do. And I feel that they've been left out altogether, although there are some shootings in colleges. I just saw something on the TV where the students were climbing out of the second floor window when there was a gun threat at a school, at a college. So it's not as if they haven't been affected by this since the young adults, since they were born, since 2001 in the World Trade Center attack. That's all they know. They don't know anything else. So we have to consider, yes, we have these children, but we need to take care of them and teach them what they need to know. And the fact is, we can all come together as communities to feed the children. We can have food banks and ways. The government has a food program, and then they say, no, let's take that away, during the end of COVID. And so, yeah, children need to eat. And so we make them into this pariah, like children should be seen but not heard. And that goes way back to when we used to dope them. There's the story of how they used opium to keep them quiet. They called it, what do they call it? The nurses, it was the old nurses treatment, where they would give them, the child care person would give opium to keep the kids quiet when they were teething. And so we used to dope them. We used to tell the 12-year-old who started menses, oh, this is a bad thing, and you can take opium for that. And then they would get addicted. Their grandmothers did it, their mothers did it, and so they did it. So it's not about just having the children, but how do we take care of them after they're born? And they're precious to me. They are our future. And economically, they're finding that out in China for sure when they restricted the birth of children to one baby. Now it's two. And the women don't want to have more children because they got used to having just one. And I know because I was there in China and I asked a tour guide about it. Women are having fertility issues there now because of all that.
Christine Silverstein is my guest, and her latest work, of course, is Wrestling Through Adversity. That's important, isn't it? We have to go through it. We cannot go around it and so on and so forth. We have to go through it. Talk to us about that.
Yes, well, in my book, in the first chapter that you mentioned, I talk from the early years of one of them is a story about how Judy and I went to the dentist, and that's how I decided I would have 8 children. But also some of the traumas I had early on. And you don't think traumas are really important. And I work with the subconscious mind, which I consider right under the conscious mind. If you think of the Titanic, I have a picture of the Titanic. The surface above that is all the conscious information like we're using now. And then below the line of the water is the subconscious. And way down deep in the bottom of the ocean is the unconscious, where we just stuff things in and bury it and we forget about it. So I'm sure that you have many, many traumas relating to your visual challenge that you just stuff down in there, and they'll pop up, they'll pop up there like they're popping up when you said to your father, well, why should I have children? Look at the condition I have. I don't want to pass it on, which is actually something that geneticists tell people now. If you have the gene for Tay-Sachs, maybe you should consider adoption, if you had that gene. So that is something credible that you're saying, but beneath all that, way down deep, are all these traumas related to it. And I described something in my book in that first chapter, two things. One was about the dentist, and the other thing was about an operation, eye surgery I had at 12 years old. And that story really I pushed down for many years, but it pops up occasionally. And I'll tell you the story. So I'm 12 years old, and the doctor told my mother, I remember going to the specialist, that I had to have this surgery before I got too old. And it was a lazy eye, and people would make fun of me. And also it was affecting my vision. So the doctor said, you have to have this surgery now before your daughter gets too old. So we went home and we discussed it. I remember sitting at the kitchen table and my parents discussing it. How are we going to pay for this? Right. So the idea was they said, we'll have to get a bank loan out to pay for this because my father's insurance only covered maybe the hospitalization, but not the doctor at that time. And so anyway, it was scheduled, and my mother was really very caring. And she took me to the hospital on that day. It was right before Christmas, so I could heal during the Christmas holiday. And I get to the hospital, first stopping off for an ice cream sundae and carrying the suitcase in. And I was on the pediatrics ward, and I was really on the verge of pre-adolescence development, physical development. And I was the only pre-adolescent on the kids on the pediatric ward. And I remember having trauma with that. The nurse coming in, giving me an enema with narcotic, and the children, the little kids were looking from the doorway laughing. They didn't give me any privacy. And so that, and then the horrible experience of ether, trying to kick my way out of that. The smell and the stench of it was disgusting. And then also afterwards, they had no recovery room. So I ended up in a room without a call bell, patches on both eyes. I couldn't see. And I vomited. I was trying to get out to go to the bathroom, and they had side rails up. They put a diaper on me. And now I'm 12. And so they left me there, and I vomited, and it's all over me, all over the bed. My grandfather walked in and saw me and called to the nurse, and I got cleaned up. But that also, I had the stitch in my eye. My mother told me the stitch will dissolve, but that wasn't true. The doctor came at my eye with a big tweezer trying to pull out the stitch, and I was screaming and yelling, a big pointed tweezer. And so that trauma stayed with me, but I didn't realize it until years later. Even last year, I had gone to the eye doctor, and I'm developing a cataract on my left eye. And so I couldn't really see the eye chart. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going blind. And the doctor was acting like, oh, I'm going to take your driver's license away. Look, your vision, your vision is so bad. What happened? So I was sitting there saying, oh my gosh, this goes back to my childhood. So I had to work through that again. And also I had iridotomies in my eyes to prevent narrow angle glaucoma, little holes drilled in my eyes. And I had to remind myself when I got home from the doctor that my left eye has a heart-shaped hole in it from the specialist. She didn't realize she was making it heart-shaped, but the next day she said, oh my gosh, I don't know how I did that, but there's a heart-shaped hole in my left eye. And I began to value my vision and what I do see. And I did some eye exercises. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but moving your hands in front of your face, etc. I learned when I was a child. And so I did those. When I went back 2 weeks later, my vision greatly improved. I calmed myself down during the exam, and I didn't need the cataract surgery right then. So that was the idea of how things come back to haunt you if you don't work on them. But now I feel very strong in my vision and know that I can see, and that my eye doctor told me 95% of vision is not the optic nerve, it's what you think and what you know inside your own mind. So that's very supportive to you and also to me.
Well, I can tell you that as a kid, I had quite a number of surgeries for cataracts. Back then, they did what was called stirring, where they would put a needle inside the eye and they would stir it up so that hopefully the cataracts would break up and then they would flow out like they should normally do, the little particles. I remember one specific surgery. I still can see it to this day, where I'm on my back. The gurney's being wheeled down to the operating room. We get in there. They were about ready to put the mask over my face. And back then, guess what they used? Ether. And I told my doctor, his name was John Aiello. I said, if you do that, I couldn't play. I think back on it. If you do this, I won't play with you anymore. Yeah. And then in 1996, when I had a lens implant in my right eye, my ophthalmologist at that time, whose name is for whatever reason escaping me right now, be that as it may, supposed to have the surgery in February, but I don't know why I freaked out. It was probably because of that childhood memory. So they had to postpone it. And I thought he was saying they weren't going to do it at all, because I definitely wanted to get that lens implant to see better. So we put it off until March 6th, 1996. Rather auspicious as far as numerology is concerned, I think. And it was actually quite the it was really a cool experience. Now, they actually had to knock me out in order to deaden the nerve as they did their thing. And then they brought me out, and I was fully conscious and awake to the point where I was sharing with everybody in the operating room this blue cheese hamburger recipe. And at one point, finally, the doctor says, you really need to be quiet. But I could see everything that they were doing.
Oh, that's so great.
When he removed the lens, of course, it went real blurry. Then when he put the artificial lens in, and then he had to, it was interesting because it has these little wires on it, and you have to turn it to hook it into the tissue of the, I believe it's the cornea. I was seeing well that day. My wife at the time and I walked to the McDonald's on the corner, and I was so disappointed at the trees, because prior to the lens implant, the trees, they looked so fluffy and full, and now they didn't look as fluffy. I could see more detail. And when we went into the McDonald's, I was actually able to read the menu up on the wall. But I have a feeling that that second experience in 96, and I'm curious if experiences that we have down the road that can be associated with some of the traumas can help to, and what's the word I want? What's the phrase I want? Help to maybe alleviate the trauma from that childhood experience where if you do this, I won't play with you anymore, kind of thing.
Mhm. Yes, you can make in your mind's eye a different picture, right? And especially when you're talking about vision, how the tree looked different, you were disappointed. So now you have a vision in reality, and you can actually see and read the menu. Oh my gosh, what a growth experience from not being able to see as a child and saying, I won't play with you.
Yeah.
But the experience.
Mm-hmm.
They're projecting them onto their own children, maybe in terms of sports. For instance, I once worked with a 10-year-old wrestler, came to my office. His father told him that he wanted him to win more tournaments. And this is on like Christmas Eve when he came in because there was a tournament coming up. And so I went into the inner office to work with the young person. He was sitting on the recliner in the corner of the room with me, and his father starts to bang on the door to the inner office. I mean, literally banging. And he's saying at the same time, teach him how to kill. He has to kill. He has to win, like that. And his son was sitting there and he's scared. He's holding onto the chair. And I said, "Is this what your father says to you, when you're wrestling?" He said, "Oh yeah, especially when I lose." And so so there's the reason, the cause. And so that comes out. And if we don't work on the traumas and our experiences from the past, I never got into what caused the father's problem, but I did get to work with him through his wife and turn him around, in his thinking, so much that the wrestling coach called me up and asked me, what did I do with the father? The son was doing well, but what did you do with the father? It turned 180 degrees to be pleasant and to work with the coach rather than to say that he wanted his son to learn how to kill. So the son did well, the father did well, and then the wrestling coach who had trauma when he was wrestling when he was younger, I helped him to audition on the stage on Broadway because he was going to school for acting, and I helped him to learn what to do from his wrestling skills and translate them onto the stage because wrestling is a performance for sure when you're wrestling in front of thousands of people. So at any rate, it turned out well. But that's the idea that people have, and they just project it onto their kids. And there's the rage and I have an example in my book where a father of a 10-year-old hockey player argued with another father because he didn't like the way the practice was going. And then they ended up squaring off, and one killed the other father right there in front of the kids. And
Wow.
so it's that I have a chapter also, violence in sports. Is it toxic or is it a elixir? And I think it can be an elixir. I know when you help the children to outgrow their adverse childhood experiences and to win. And that's the mindset that I have, that I actually got from my father, who worked for the police athletic league for 25 years.
Hmm. Let me ask you before we wrap up here in regards to these different experiences that we have in our lives. I asked you about the importance of failure.
Yes.
And it is an important factor. Many of my guests who I kind of put that question to them, I ask them, how important is it in the work that you do, kind of thing.
Mhm. Yes, well, I think
Go
it's
ahead.
very important in the sense that you do not how to you don't know how to overcome adversity unless you have adversity, and it's very important for parents to understand that, to help their children to grow even through these challenges, because even if you have the perfect life, before you go to kindergarten or first grade, maybe you're right on top of it with your children and everything's fine, but they could be bullied the first day of school, in the schoolyard, and they're not going to be prepared for that. So that's how you do it. And you do it with the little things first. Like, you know, I wasn't invited to my friend's birthday party or some trauma like that. Some more serious traumas like what you had as a child. And you help them through it as you go along with these principles. This is, you could see yourself seeing in your case, and then you actually did, because as I said, a large part of vision is in your mind, the subconscious mind. So, so to use the power of the mind and to realize that your children have to go through adversity, unfortunately, but not to the extent where you're in Gaza and you see your whole family being murdered. But before you get to a place like that, what to do, even in an emergency, like Phil Nowick, I spoke about before, he knew to run out of the building and down the street, and he could do it. He knew what to do because of his training. And also, he had his sneakers on, and he lamented that some of the other people had dress shoes on and ladies had high heels and they couldn't run as fast. He noticed that because they were all in it together trying to run from the building. So, and even he saw wrestling through this in life as a growth experience, because after that, he started a wrestling school, something that he always wanted to do, and he was a coach. So that was before he died. So adversity, no, we don't like to have it, but it's essential to learn what to do. And I call that resilience. And that's why we wrestle through it, so we can become resilient no matter what happens in life, we can handle it.
I think my experiences throughout my life, I like to say my brief 63 years on the planet, has given me the perspective that I want to help other people to work through their adversity. I consider myself not lucky, but maybe, I don't know if fortunate is any better, but nonetheless, that I am living in a place where I have wanted to live for decades. Not so much Santa Barbara, but by the ocean. I've wanted to live, and I didn't think that I didn't know where I was going to move. Could have been on the East Coast for all that mattered. But I'm living here on the central coast of California, as they call it. I'm doing what I love to do, which is conduct these interviews, have these conversations with folks such as yourself. And in spite of all of the adversity that is before me right now, and I can say that we rent a piece of property up on a hill above Santa Barbara that's been up for sale for a year. We also, I am working for a radio station that is in the process of being sold. This is the 5th time in my career. I don't know what's going to happen on either fronts. I'm dealing on a medical level with some conditions that I wish I wasn't, but I'm getting through it. It's taking a little longer than I like. I figure, all right, my physical body is taking a lot longer to heal. And I understand that because my body is older. But something that you said that I have adopted, and I adopted this, my God, probably 40, 45 years ago. My visual acuity, even before the lens implant, it's a perceived limitation.
Yes.
I was queuing up records at a radio station back in the 80s, early 90s. And of course, someone noticed that I had a magnifying glass and I was using that to see where I put the needle and everything. And they said, I didn't know you had a visual problem. I says, oh yeah, I've had this all my life. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't notice, but that's okay,
Mhm.
And yet I could queue up a record. I could queue up a record in pretty much 5 seconds flat from the cabinet to the turntable with the needle
Mhm.
on and then back queuing it to be ready to play. Yeah, and I just learned to do that. I've learned to do a lot of things that you wouldn't think people with quote unquote my condition would do. I worked with totally blind individuals who ran the console at the first radio station that I worked for, Sun Sounds Radio Reading Service for the blind and
Mhm.
visually impaired. So they did the same thing as I did. They didn't say, no, I can't do anything because I can't see.
Mhm. They adapted.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they made a way.
Mhm.
They made a way.
Yes. Well, think of Beethoven, who created his symphonies. He was deaf, so
Yeah.
it didn't stop him either.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Christine Silverstein, my guest, the book Wrestling Through Adversity, Empowering Children, Teens, and Young Adults to Win in Life. And you're listening to Tell Me Your Story. Christine, we are fast approaching the end of our conversation here, and I've really enjoyed this. I do have 3 final questions that I ask all of my guests. But before I ask those questions of you, let me thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and Wednesdays at 9 a.m., streaming live at those times at richarddugan.com. We're also on Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Player FM, and a lot of other locations on the internet. And we're also on YouTube. And I thank the folks who have been listening to and watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you will share the audio and video with people so that they can learn something here as well. Again, it's choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We also ask if you can financially support us. So we have a PayPal account. It's there for your security as well as ours. And we also ask you to spend some time going within during the decade of perfect vision. We ask you to spend some time going within and listening to that still small voice. And with all of that being said, the first of my 3 questions as we wrap up this particular conversation: who is Christine Silverstein?
Who I am from early age, I knew I had a mission. I remember saying to myself when I was 5 years old and I was rejected by my parents, my little brother won over the argument. And I remember going to this vacant lot and saying to myself, I got to do things myself. Leave me alone. I'll do it myself. That was my attitude. And I remember coming home and saying that. And my parents supported, they would laugh. They kind of grin to each other and really support my independence. And I believe that is who I am still today. I wrote this book. It took me a year and a half to get it to fruition, to be published in September 9th, on September 19th. And I have brought those principles, like I did when I was 10 years old, as a mighty mass into my life so many times to accomplish my goals. I've always been goal oriented and seeing the vision of myself, and I work towards that goal. And I also have the very special name my mother gave me, Christine, which means follower of Christ. My mother was a convert Catholic from a Protestant religion. And she sent me to Catholic school. I went there for 15 years. I ended up marrying somebody Jewish, who I'm married to now. But at the same time, I believe in that. It means follower of Christ. So that's how I live my life. That's who I am.
What is your life's purpose?
Well, my life's purpose is to reach out to others and to translate what I know so people can understand. I'm a visual learner. I understand metaphor. That's the way I understand my world. So I translate, and I've been doing that since early childhood when people would come to me and say, so Christine, what do I do with my teenage daughter? And I'm thinking, why are you asking me? I'm just a kid, but I'd answer them and they like my answer. So that I made that my mission. I went to nursing school at 16. And my first thing was, well, how do I talk to patients when they're dying or they're sick or they have to have an operation? What do I do, to help them? So that's always been my mission. And I graduated from nursing school at 19 and I decided I'm going to use all these skills to help people throughout the world. And that's what I'm doing now.
And finally, what was your best day?
My best day, I have to say, I'll say days with the births of my 4 children. But I remember one in particular when I received my doctorate from Columbia University. And it was a very challenging time to get through my doctoral studies because I was such an eclectic thinker. And my dissertation had to be changed at the last minute because they thought that my studies were all my imagination. So anyway, I changed my dissertation and wrote another one in 6 weeks on the history of nursing science rather than the history of nursing, of psychiatric nursing. So I'm sitting in the quadrangle at Columbia University in my cap and gown, and it's pouring rain. And so we all had umbrellas, but the water was dripping on us from each other's umbrella. And Maya Angelou, she gave the keynote address, and it was so inspirational for me. And it was just the happiest day of my life to get there. And my mom, who wanted to be a nurse when she was young, never got to be, and she came with her walker down St. John the Divine where the hooding ceremony took place, and she was there to see me get my doctorate. And also, I heard this little whistle there. It sounded like my father's whistle. He was known as Blow because he used to deliver mail and he whistled. And so I heard a whistle like my dad there too, congratulating me, even though he had passed away years earlier. So I think that was one of the happiest days of my life, graduating with a doctorate from Columbia University when my parents were everyday working people. They had high school education and they wished this for me.
Well, Christine, thank you so much for sharing your story and the work you're doing through this new book, Wrestling Through Adversity. And we will send people to idealperformance.net. And again, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed discussing our traumas and our victories.
Absolutely. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lol. Jeanette, I'm still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. To my dear friend Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.